Welcome everyone to the first ever EWTN National Pro-Life Roundtable. We're here in St. Bridget's Center for the Performing Arts in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. We're just a short walk from here to Parliament Hill, the seat of governmental power in this great nation of Canada. Also, it's the site for the great March for Life in this nation. I'm Jim Pinto. This is my beloved wife, Joy. We count it a great privilege to be co-hosts for this important time. Joy?
Well, as you've guessed by our surroundings, that we're in a church-like setting. St. Bridget's Center was once a parish. And during way back in the 1890s, but as of 2007, it was deconsecrated. And now it's home to many performances of the arts and television productions just like this one. Today we're going to be discussing important life issues affecting Canadians, and that's why it's so important, not just for Canadians, but for the rest of the world.
Today we'll be discussing important life issues affecting Canadians throughout the world. As many of you know, Canada is one of the few nations in the world that does not have an abortion law on the books. As a matter of fact, the ancient law of Canada says that one is only a child after passing through its mother and being born alive. Add this to the Supreme Court decision striking down the law against assisted suicide, and you have a lethal combination at both ends of life. We're going to have several panels that are going to share during this time. Panel 1 will bring you up to speed on the importance of the debate in Canada regarding the life issues and the importance of that for the world. Panel 2 will discuss the Supreme Court's decision to strike down the law against assisted suicide, and we'll share about conscience rights for doctors that are now under attack. Panel 3 will discuss politics and the culture of death with a special emphasis on abortion. And Panel 4 will discuss how concerned Christians and citizens can be mobilized to change hearts and minds for life.
Well, as Catholics, we have to remind ourselves that we are called to be a people of hope. So let's get things underway. Well, to give a brief history and the current state of affairs on the life issues in Canada, please welcome our first panel. His Grace, Archbishop Terence Prendergast, Archdiocese of Ottawa. Tanya Granick-Allen, who is from Campaign Life Coalition. Deborah Japong, who is a journalist, and Louise Harbour, who is the Executive Director of Action Life. Thank you all for being a part of the panel and the roundtable today.
Amen. Your Grace, we'll begin with you. And even before we get into the history of the life issues in Canada, could you speak to the wisdom of the Church, the firm stand of the Church over the centuries, sometimes the lone voice on behalf of the sanctity of human life, that wisdom, that firmness?
Well, I think we need to go back even further than the beginnings of the Church to the Bible itself and the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses sets up before the people of God, before they're entering into the Promised Land, the choice between life and death. He says, God sets these before you today, choose life. It may go well with you in the land. So the principle of life, while we are concerned about the issues of life in the womb and life at the end of a person's journey through this world, life as the main principle is already structured into the whole biblical witness, yes, the life of the prophets and the patriarchs and so on. They affirmed life. They wanted children. They wanted life. And they respected life at the very end. We have the great stories in the Bible of the death of the patriarchs, for example. And then in the early years of the Church, we have also, of course, the witness of our Lord Jesus Christ, who affirmed life and gave life, raised a couple of people back to life, Lazarus and the daughter of Jairus, affirmed life by calling people to be whole and entire. That's a very gifted blessing that he gave to us. And then finally, in the early years of the Church, a text that didn't make it into the canon, but which is very key, is called the Teaching of the 12 Apostles, the Didache. And it speaks about how Christians don't expose their children. They don't put children to death. They don't destroy life in the womb. They affirm life at every stage. And so it is throughout the ages. There's always been this issue. In the Great War, in which we're remembering this year, and the Great Second World War that's 70 years over, affirmation of life was very important. When the Nazis wanted to do experiments on human persons, the so-called people who were handicapped or disabled, they wanted to experiment on them, and the church rose up and said, no, this is not right. This is not the dignity of the human person. So the church has always affirmed that, and I think since we've had, in the modern time, the issue of abortion and euthanasia and assisted suicide, the church has continued to be constant and firm in articulating the vision of life from conception to natural death. So I think the church's record, even if we fail from time to time in actually living out of that reality, has been very clear.
Thank you.
Well, Tanya, for decades, Campaign Life Coalition has been on the front line for legal and cultural changes in Canada with respect to protecting the human family and human life. Briefly, tell us, where did it all begin?
Well, I suppose it really all began with Humanae Vitae, and the Canadian bishop's response to that was what we refer to as the Winnipeg Statement, which was a problematic statement because essentially there were some elements that were problematic for Catholics, suggestions that decisions of morality be left unto one's individual conscience, and so forth. And that preceded the decriminalization of abortion in Canada. So that was in the 1968. In 1969, abortion became decriminalized in Canada. And I should add that that was under and ushered in by a Catholic prime minister, a nominally Catholic prime minister. And currently his son is seeking to be prime minister himself. That aside, Campaign Life Coalition was always very active in the response to defend life from that time forward. When Dr. Henry Morgentaler, a, can I say, notorious abortionist in this country, was challenging and setting up private clinics, which in the early days abortion was only permitted to be done in hospitals. But he was challenging, pushing the envelope. Campaign Life was there, obviously lobbying and whatnot. You know, when he was awarded a high honor, the award, the Order of Canada, just a few years ago, Campaign Life Coalition was very vocal against this. In 1988, when the abortion law was struck down in '69, it was put in place with a temporary law that said, okay, only under certain circumstances abortion could be done, but we all know that it was exploited. And in 1988, that law was completely destroyed, leaving us with lawlessness. So like you were mentioning, Jim, there are no rights for the unborn until that very last toe is out of the uterus and that baby has taken a breath, which is a shame. And again, Campaign Life Coalition has responded to, and actually been at the forefront, I should say, in defending life, not just here, but also internationally. When the Pope, John Paul II, asked us to have an international presence, Campaign Life Coalition back in the 90s started sending delegations to the UN to even defend and promote life there. So we've been involved in various capacities, and unfortunately, we're still struggling. We're still fighting this battle that I'm sure many of us thought would be over by now.
I'm going to ask Louise, because I had heard this name, Dr. Morgentaler, come up, and I'm not all that familiar with him, and I know his name was associated with you, and you would have more background on him and how he fits into this historical context.
Well, Henry Morgentaler was a doctor and an abortionist. I think he's the person most identified with the battle for abortion in Canada. When the law was changed in 1969, it only allowed abortions in hospital settings with so-called therapeutic abortion committees. But Dr. Morgentaler was performing abortions in his private clinic, which was illegal. It was also a very lucrative business for him, and he was charged. He went to jail for a brief time, and then he was charged a number of times, but on each other occasion, the juries would acquit him. So after a number of acquittals, the government in Quebec decided that he would no longer be charged, and he continued to operate his private clinic and do abortions illegally. Then, over the number of years, he decided to expand his business in Toronto along with 2 other physicians, and he was charged there, which is what led to his challenge. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada and asking for abortion on demand. And then the Supreme Court ruled in January 1988. It struck down the law in 1969, saying that it struck down the law because of procedural inequities. Not every hospital had an abortion committee, therefore it would cause some distress to women under their security of the life and liberty of the person. And then after that, abortion clinics, private abortion clinics appeared everywhere in Canada, and Dr. Morgentaler continued to do abortions, and he thought he was a great champion of women's right, and he was providing a great service, and his motto was always, every child a wanted child, and that he was somehow preventing, would-be criminals from being born because they were unwanted. So,
thank you.
Well, Deborah, your journey with the movement started when you saw the hidden agenda creeping into the Parliament. Can you speak to this?
Well, I worked briefly in politics after leaving the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and I worked in the war room for Stockwell Day, who was a Christian, very open about his beliefs, and he was completely pro-life in his stance. And the Liberal government, or the Liberals at that time, mounted a campaign against him saying that he was going to bring back the criminalization of abortion, and they tried to paint him as a scary evangelical Christian, and there was even a magazine cover of Maclean's, which is like our Time magazine, saying, "How scary," with a picture of Stockwell Day on it. And I was horrified to see the Christian beliefs of a political leader being used as ammunition against him. And what happened was this abortion issue turned out to be so explosive and so negative for Mr. Day, who in the early rounds looked like he could have won the election. He was very charismatic and a very presentable candidate, but after this constant beating of the drum of he's going to take away your right to abortion, he lost. He did reduce the Liberal government to a minority, and he managed to get a number of Canadian Alliance members in at the time. They are now called the Conservative Party. But what has happened is that the whole abortion issue since then has been deemed radioactive. And because of this growing idea that there is a right to abortion, which the Supreme Court never said, it's a fiction. The Supreme Court said that the Parliament did have an interest in restricting abortion, perhaps around the third trimester, and turned it over to Parliament to create a law. When they did try to introduce a law that would restrict abortion after certain trimesters, it failed in the Senate by a tie vote. And so nobody has ever tried to put any abortion legislation in since. There have been attempts since then to have private members' bills, like one a couple of years ago, to examine that ancient definition of the human being that unless the baby has exited the birth canal, it is not a person under the law. Somebody wanted, just put a motion out, can we have a committee set up to examine this 400-year-old law, which came from a time when people had no idea what was going on inside the womb. And this was defeated. It also is a very career-limiting move for any MP who decides that he wants to bring up an abortion-related move. There was even a motion to restrict sex selection abortion, which 90% of Canadians supported, according to opinion polls, but that wasn't even allowed to go to a vote. So it's a very dismal scene as far as politics go in Canada.
Your Grace, so here we are in the seat of governmental power, Ottawa, capital. Here's the Archdiocese of Ottawa, here, seat of eternal power. What ways or what sort of influence has the Archdiocese had on parliamentarians? What are we trying to do as an Archdiocese? What kind of influence have we tried to bring to these people?
Well, I would say that we've come a long way from the time when one of my predecessors would have the Prime Minister and his cabinet in his dining room for supper and talking about what they would do in Parliament. The Church has really been marginalized from public discourse When I was transferred from Halifax to the Archdiocese of Ottawa 8 years ago, people in Halifax said, now you're going to go and straighten out those politicians in Ottawa, aren't you? And I said, well, I'm not sure that's going to happen because each parliamentarian really has a bishop back home. I'm the bishop of the people when they're here, and I try to deal with them and speak with them, but most of them come from other constituencies. Most of them represent Alberta or Nova Scotia or Newfoundland or Prince Edward Island. So there's a limited role that the bishop can have. I certainly am pleased to be invited and to occasionally celebrate on Parliament Hill. There's a chapel that was named after a young man who was the youngest person elected to the House of Commons when he was in Hamilton, and later on left the Parliament to become a priest. Sean O'Sullivan was his name, and he wrote a book called On Both My Houses, showing how the Lord can call us different ways to serve in the public life, but also in the priesthood. They have a chapel there that's named in his honor, and I've had Mass there a few times. I try to deal as cordially and fairly as I can with people when they come to me, but most politicians, I think if they consult anyone, they consult their own conscience, their own families. I think very few people today consult the faith, their pastors. I could be wrong on that, but that's my sense from the limited time I've had with politicians both in Nova Scotia and here in Ottawa. I have cordial relations with a number of politicians. I see a number of them who are local at different church events, and some of them are clearly pro-life, and others take positions that differ from that. We've had conversations, but that's basically the extent of my engagement and the church's engagement. Now, what congregations can have, I don't know. I did celebrate Mass one evening at St. Patrick's Basilica, and there were people, members of Parliament from the West Coast, who came up to say hello to me afterwards, because I talked about how the church needed to respond to the assisted suicide bill, the decision by the Supreme Court to strike down the law, and that, again, the Supreme Court said, as it did with the abortion issue, is that Parliament has a right to legislate, to make a law. They have to do it within certain parameters, but nonetheless they can do. I'm afraid that we may end up with the same kind of response to this challenge by the Supreme Court as we have with abortion, which is no law. And that would be terrible. I think it would be the imposition of the culture of death in a very extreme form.
Thank you.
Well, Tanya, we know that campaign life has a rich history and demonstrations, keeping the issue in the forefront with your government, with sit-ins and marches and life change. Can you speak to the importance of these events and your time at the UN?
Sure, certainly. I remember my first foray into the pro-life movement when I was 8 in 1988, distributing flyers door to door. I wasn't exactly sure what I was doing, but as I looked through the flyer, I said, Mom, Dad, what is going on? They said, well, unfortunately, the politicians have decided that a whole class of human beings deserve no rights. So in my experience, and of course many of us here experience, is that going to events like the March for Life, writing letters to your local politicians, lobbying, as an organization, of course, as an individual, is very important to keep the issue at the forefront. Deborah referenced a bill, or a motion rather, that was put forth in government. Again, just simply, let's just examine when human life begins in a committee setting. And not even the Prime Minister of Canada could even support something like that. And to me, that just shows the climate. It's far different than in the United States than what you might be used to, where if you're pro-life and you're running for government, you use it as a sign of approval, and you hold that high honor. But in Canada, sometimes being labeled pro-life is seen as a massive blemish and stigmatizes you as a candidate. So I think through Campaign Life and other pro-life organizations, the importance of keeping the pressure and being a very visible presence, especially here at the March for Life, when you have over 25,000 people from coast to coast coming and representing the voices of millions of Canadians. Because the majority of Canadians do want some restriction on abortion in Canada, yet our laws simply do not reflect that. So putting some march like that together, again, local life chains, it's very important. And I think the MPs, the member of parliaments that is, they feel the voice. They hear the voice and they feel the pressure, especially when we talk about things like, why as a government we're funding the abortions, and why can't we bring in tighter controls in the clinics, things like this.
Deborah, that phrase, or cliche phrase now, my body, my life, myself, that thing, How has that played it out? It's associated with women's rights, but how has it played out truly regarding women's rights and worked its way out in the culture?
Well, choice, and I think it was a very wise strategic move on the part of the pro-abortion crowd to co-opt the word choice, to frame things in terms of women's rights, so that the rights of the other human being that she is carrying have been totally overshadowed by this idea of choice. The whole idea of human freedom now has come to mean choice and autonomy, and we see that reflected as well in euthanasia, where people are saying, I want to have the choice to die when I want to die, and I want to have the right to make a doctor do it for me, even if he doesn't agree or she says it's against her conscience. So, and this is a very, very deep problem as we move away from any notion of rights as conferred by God and inherent in our human nature.
Thank you.
Louise, let's talk statistics. How bad has it been, and how bad is it now?
Well, at the beginning, the statistics were very good. Starting in 1970, they were collected by, compiled, and published by Statistics Canada. And it was that way until the Supreme Court decision in Morgentaler in 1988. And what happened after that is that some of the provinces interpreted the Supreme Court decision as meaning that they no longer had to report complete abortion statistics to Statistics Canada because the old law contained a provision where they were required to report. So what we saw, especially the private abortion clinics, would only report numbers. In the past, you had a complete record, the age of the mother, the gestational age of the child, the method of abortion used, if there were any complications. Then the private clinics would only report numbers, and now the statistics are incomplete. You only have partial statistics, numbers. Some private clinics don't report. So we know there are at least 100,000 abortions in Canada every year, but the last reported statistics give us 83,000. For example, through the diligent work of a pro-life blogger who's here today, Pat Maloney, Run With Life blog, she made a Freedom of Information request regarding the abortion statistics for the province of Ontario in 2010. So the official statistics reported 28,000 for that year for Ontario, but in fact she found out through her request that there were actually 44,000. So that gives you an indication of how the number that we get is not an accurate reflection of what, and we have demanded better abortion statistics, but nothing has been done.
Deborah, how do you see it culturally? How has the pro-life movement done positively, negatively in Canada?
I think that on a cultural level, the pro-life movement is making some headway. Politically, because they're a very small demographic can turn an election one way or another. And that demographic of single women who rely on the government or as a kind of security blanket and who want their right to abortion is a significant demographic that can cause a win or a loss. And we saw that in the United States in the last presidential election, where Obama went completely pro-abortion in his message, and a lot of us were looking at this saying, what's he doing? That's shocking, this is America. But somebody had done the numbers and said there's just a small slice of people and low information voters that he could win. I think it's the same picture in Canada, but culturally, every year, pretty much, the National March for Life has grown. The movement has become younger and younger and become very adept at using social media and getting a message out. And so what I see is a sign that there is some traction among young people who realize that they're here because of the grace of God, really, or providence or luck, that they could have been aborted, and they're here.
Panelists, thank you so much. So very, very informative. Our next panel will be dealing with the striking down of the law criminalizing assisted suicide and conscience rights for doctors. We'll be right back. Please don't go away. Well, welcome back to EWTN's National Pro-Life Roundtable. Two very significant events have taken place recently here in Canada. First, the Supreme Court struck down the ban on physician-assisted suicide. This will now give the right to a doctor or a nurse to kill their patient if Parliament does not act to prevent this. Secondly, equally troubling, is that the Council of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario now requires physicians to provide their patients with an effective referral to another healthcare provider for those services the physician chooses not to provide services for reasons of his conscience. He has to refer so that somebody else will do the dirty work, basically.
Well, our esteemed panel right now is Christian Ilya, and he's the Executive Director of Catholic Civil Rights League. Dr. Tim Lau, he's a geriatric psychiatrist with Royal Ottawa Mental Health Center. And then Alex Schadenberg, the Executive Director of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and beautiful Taylor Hyatt, who's with a student activist from the Carleton University of Ottawa. And welcome you all here. Let's start with euthanasia. The Supreme Court of Canada says a law that it makes legal for anyone to help people end their own lives should be amended to allow doctors to help in specific situations. So Alex, I'm going to start with you. Tell us what happened in February at the Supreme Court and why we should all be so concerned.
Well, the Supreme Court of Canada case came through British Columbia first, and what they did is they struck down our law that protected people from assisted suicide, but it also used language that might actually affect the question of euthanasia, which means the doctor actually lethally injecting. So that's a little different from what's been happening in the US, where they've been debating assisted suicide, which means the doctor provides a lethal prescription for someone to kill themselves. Now, what they did was very scary because they did so by using very vague language. And this was very concerning to me because it creates a situation where it'll be very difficult for Parliament to actually be able to institute a law that gets held up by the courts because the court used language which was not clear and precise. You know, that's very difficult. The other thing which very much really upset me is how they reinterpreted Section 7 of our Charter. So just to give you information, Section 7 of our Charter is the right to life. So normally you would interpret the right to life as being the saving grace as to protect people who are vulnerable from euthanasia or assisted suicide. The court decided to redefine it and say the right to life also constitutes a right to die. And that is a new legal idea that had never been presented before in Canada, and the Supreme Court created this idea. So when you combine this whole sort of mess, and then they said Parliament has 12 months to institute a new law. Well, 12 months might make sense in one situation, other than there's an election in October, meaning that there was not time for our current Parliament to institute a law. There wasn't time. There wasn't parliamentary time to do so. And then after the election, there won't be time again to get it done before February 5th, which would be the 12-month ending point. So they put Parliament into a situation where they couldn't have enough time to do what they were asked to do. And so it's a very concerning situation for Canadians like myself, because we're saying, well, how are we then going to protect Canadians from having this done to them, especially if you consider euthanasia and assisted suicide? It's only considered by people who are at a most vulnerable time of their life. These are people who need protection in law, and yet the law is up in the air. So there's a few things that are going on, and we as a group are asking that the Parliament have a commission to examine the issue, and also to use something called the notwithstanding clause, which is a clause in our Constitution that allows Parliament to temporarily override a Supreme Court decision. So it's a very difficult time for somebody like me in the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition because everything's sort of politically in the air, and it's making it very difficult to know how to protect Canadians at this point.
Dr. Lau, this changing of the law and moving towards allowing assisted suicide, euthanasia, this is a slippery slope that other nations have experienced. Where does this place Canada at this point? What are your concerns?
Well, my concern for Canada is really how everything unfolded. You know, if you look back at the history of medicine, 2,600 years ago, Hippocrates, and it's connected to this discussion of conscience as well, because he revolutionized medicine for two reasons. One was he tried to remove myths out of the practice of medicine, but the second was to try and introduce a conscientious practice by an oath. And the oath was to first do no harm, and it included even if someone asked to be given something to end their lives. So this is not a new thing. Euthanasia is not a new thing. But it seems to have taken on a new kind of urgency in the last few years, so much so that it's clear to me that people want to deceive people by changing terminology. If you look at the terminology of this whole argument, you know, the Quebec's a province in Canada, and they introduced their own legislation that included changing the term to medical aid in dying, which most physicians and most people in society would understand that to be palliative care. But they confuse it with medical aid with dying and incorporate as well therapeutic homicide, so actually inflicting the death on a patient as a type of treatment. So they're trying to make that kind of thing actually a treatment, which turns medicine a bit on its head. And if you think of all treatments, this is one of the legal arguments that have come up. If you consider it a treatment, medical treatments have errors. So you're allowed a certain number of errors that are acceptable, but that wouldn't be acceptable if it was a violation of the criminal code. You can't accidentally kill somebody. If you actually killed somebody and it was shown to be, you know, an error, for example, Jack Kevorkian, you know, many of the patients he killed they ended up on autopsy and not having the things that he thought they had. So, you know, I think our concern is manifold. It's the deception of how this whole thing unfolded. And at the level of the physicians, you know, our last large council meeting that was in Canada, the delegates were told, I would say, a very one-sided story to the question of the slippery slope that you mentioned before. It is actually an error that there is no slippery slope. That was something one person from Belgium came and said, and there was no counter argument given. Mm-hmm. As well, during the speech you heard from delegates, many of them showed how confused they actually are. G.K. Chesterton once said that ethics are terribly complicated to those who have lost their principles. People just do not realize what it is they're saying. One physician who's an emergency doctor got up and said, you know, we give medications to patients all the time and sometimes they die. If a person cannot see that ethically there is a huge difference between someone dying because you give a medication by accident as opposed to actually doing it to end their lives, it's the same thing as driving down the street, running over somebody and saying there's no difference if I tried to run them down because I wanted to kill them, as opposed to accidentally hitting them because I didn't see them.
Well, Christian, there are those that consider this a legal issue and that this is their right. What was your reaction when you heard this news?
Well, there's no basis for that, really. It's not so much a legal issue, but rather an example of judicial activism on part of the Supreme Court. And that might sound like a provocative statement, but I can back it up. And also in terms of conscience rights and regulatory bodies, which is something you brought up, Jim, also. First of all, with euthanasia, and Alex touched upon this, it was by some sort of twisted, convoluted sense of the law that if a person were to be advanced enough in the state of their illness, and if they were unable to be able to kill themselves, that their quality of life would be hampered because they wouldn't be able to kill themselves because they would be too weak and they would need help. Therefore, not being able to kill oneself, not being able to die, basically threatens your pursuit of happiness in life, to use an American term, which just sounds completely ridiculous. Also, the reason why I can say it seems like an illogical sense of application of judicial activism is we've had this come up in court many, many times. We've had it come up in Parliament in the last 10 years. In fact, it wasn't too long ago that the then interim leader of the Liberal Party of Canada introduced an anti-suicide motion. It was a yay or nay vote, like just an audible vote, more of a gesture type of thing than a legal application, and it was roundly supported. So we've gone from a country that has invested money into helping those who are depressed, helping in terms of palliative care and caring for the aged and having dignity at that spectrum, at that end of one's life, to all of a sudden turning everything on its head, where we find ourselves in a state of suicide relativism, if you will. So it's a radical departure from the recent culture of Canadians and Canada and what we've believed to be true, not to mention in public opinion polls. Now, let's be charitable. Dying, I think people, perhaps particular people who don't have a strong faith background, see dying as something completely horrible that should be avoided at all costs, or delayed at all costs. And then when it comes near, there's a great sense of fear. There's a great sense of fear. So let's be charitable and assume that many people who might be proponents for this termination of life, this killing of the sick and the vulnerable, it's mostly out of fear. It just really seems illogical that we have this decision by the Supreme Court, and even draconian, as Alex explained, that with an election year, it would be impossible even for the existing Parliament to come up with a new law. In terms of conscience rights and physicians, and Dr. Lau addressed this, you know, what can you say about going from a situation of centuries and centuries and centuries where physicians take an oath and swear to, you know, uphold the truth of being in the business of saving lives, and now all of a sudden going back to the original problem that Hippocrates faced when physicians were in the business of doing both. You would go to the physician, you might get some sorcery, you might get some herbal medicine, you might get the cup of hemlock. And we've basically gotten there right now. It sounds dramatic and radical, but it's the truth. And let me tell you one thing, Jim, about law. We do not have a right of patient autonomy does not exist in Canadian law. It does not exist in provincial law, this concept of I'm the patient, you do what you're told, in terms of a physician. But what we do have in this country enshrined in law is freedom of conscience and religion. That is in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That would be highly esteemed as an amendment in the American Constitution, for example. So that exists, and that can be cast aside arbitrarily like that. So there's really no application of the law. There's a turning upside down on its head of the law.
Taylor, you've been outspoken regarding this whole area of euthanasia. Young people, people with disabilities, share your concerns.
One of the more common questions I have faced in speaking out against the Supreme Court decision: you're only 23, and getting to know you, you look like a very capable, independent young woman. Why are you worried about this? To which I would say, sure, it doesn't look like I have much of a problem now, but when I get to 63, 73, will I need more assistance than the average able-bodied senior citizen? And will the Supreme Court have opened up a societal shift? I would argue that most people see those with terminal illnesses as needing what the Supreme Court now allows. But what if eventually we look at someone in my condition who uses a walker or a wheelchair? Oh, I can't see myself looking like that. What trouble must she have to go through? I'd rather end my life before I end up in her shoes.
Thank you. Let's move to conscience rights. A key feature of the revised policy, says the College of Physicians of Ontario, is that it requires physicians to provide their patients with an effective referral to another healthcare provider for those services the physician chooses not to provide for reasons of conscience or religion. Alex, is this something new in Canada, and what does it ultimately mean?
Well, the issue of conscience has been challenged for a while, but now it's becoming official as a statement. So now the physicians, such as Dr. Lau and the physicians groups, are recognizing that they have to now fight back to maintain their conscience rights. Now, what's very important about conscience is, as a person who might be going to my physician, I want my physician to be able to protect my life. I want to be able to go to my physician when I'm having a difficult time. I might be going through a deeper, dark time of my life where I'm having a difficulty with my emotional stability because of a disease I might be experiencing. I want to be safe. And the only way I can be safe is if my physician has the conscience rights to say to me, no, I'm not going to do that to you. I'm going to help treat you instead. I'm going to care for you instead. But in Ontario, they're now saying that he's going to have to refer me to someone who will kill me.
Dr. Lau, you want to weigh in on this?
Well, one thing I would like to say is, with regards to conscience, it's creating a false kind of dichotomy where it's us against the patients in medicine, which is not the case. It's true, there's two autonomous agents in any encounter with two people, but when we act for our patients, when you act conscientiously, you're acting in their interest as well. The people, this all started, I believe, this was published on LifeSite News. It was an initiative of the Conscience Research Group, which included Jocelyn Downey and some law professors and philosophy professors. And it was a concerted effort to influence the provincial regulatory bodies in a unified way, ideologically driven with the idea of making physicians who are uncomfortable with certain things, for example, like referral for abortion or what have you, to make them do it because they feel they have a right to it, or they want to make other people do what they want. So that was the drive behind it. I think the issue of conscience is a personal one, but it protects patients if your physicians act with integrity. If your physicians are acting in a way that they believe is right, that's going to protect patients, not hurt them. If you look at the handful of people who I think they were particularly targeting, to my knowledge, there is not actually, aside from one case in the news, one person who wanted a prescription for contraceptives, but just ended up having to go across the street to get it. And then it went in the news, and this physician who was at the center of it, got a lot of heat for this. But I would say he has thousands of patients who love him and want to see him just because of the way he practices. And I think if he were not to practice because someone wants to make him act in a certain way, all of his patients will suffer.
Well, Dr. Ilya, how would you frame the discussion that this is about a patient's right to access to treatment, and that this is simply about competing rights?
Okay, well, it is true that there are no hierarchy of rights. So I mentioned that it's enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedom that we have freedom of conscience and religion. But we realize that a balance is often required because individuals have rights too. That's the way great free societies work. But it's never been proven that any patient in any Canadian jurisdiction has been put at a great disadvantage because of the relatively small, very, very small, unfortunately, number of doctors who would conscientiously object to practices such as prescription for birth control or even abortion. I'm sorry, if you want an abortion and there's a doctor who won't provide that, it will be easier to go down the street or even to the next town to get another one way quicker than you would have to in the many months it would take to get a hip replacement, for example. So there's no evidence that there's an issue.
Thank you. Taylor, you get the closing word. Young people are going to have to live with these decisions. What's your message to the young people?
I would tell people around my age that even though we might feel like we're invincible now, it's going to be affecting our parents, our grandparents, our older friends and loved ones in the short term, and 10, 20, 50 years down the road, we'll have ended up forsaking our own rights and dignity if we don't act now.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, one and all. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation on the politics of abortion and the culture of death. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back to EWTN's National Pro-Life Roundtable. We're going to continue to speak about abortion, and this is a year of elections, and so we have to deal with the real possibility that the situation here in Canada may not be perfect politically, but it might actually move from conservative to liberal, which should give us all pause.
Well, with us to discuss in these issues, we welcome back Your Grace Archbishop Pendergrass and Deborah Japong, and also Patrick Crane, who's with LifeSite News, and Elisa Globe, who is with Campaign Life Coalition. And Elisa, we're going to start with you. So I believe it was last year, around this time of the march, when the official opposition, your Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau, he made a bold statement to his constituents and to the country of Canada. What did he say, and why should we all be concerned?
Well, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau made the proclamation that anyone who holds the pro-life position cannot even run for the Liberal Party of Canada, and any remaining pro-life candidates who want to run again for the Liberal Party must vote pro-abortion on any bills.
He's saying you can't even be a part of the party?
He's discriminating against pro-lifers from even running for the Liberal Party of Canada. So not only do we have to contend with a leader who is in favor of this violation of fundamental human rights, but now he is discriminating against, half the country who disagree with abortion from even taking part in our democratic process.
Deborah, the Liberals have framed abortion as a charter right. Is it?
It's not a charter right. First of all, the Supreme Court decision in Morgentaler said that Parliament had an interest in protecting the life of unborn children, perhaps at some level or some time in the pregnancy, and left it to Parliament to decide that. It has been framed as a right. What's very interesting is that the preamble of our Constitution talks about how Canada's laws are founded on a belief in God and in the rule of law. And that preamble has been set aside so that we see rights now thought of as conferred by the state or conferred by the charter, when the original framers of Canada saw rights as conferred by God, and something that was, like in the US you talk about rights being self-evident, but in Canada they had a similar view that God conferred the rights and the state merely recognized them. So what's happening is that we have a charter that says certain things, but we now have what's called the living tree model of the Constitution, and I think you've also had that in the United States as well, where the charter means whatever we think it means at any given time. It's just an empty container. The words change their meaning according to the culture, and therefore the charter and rights mean whatever the Supreme Court justices happen to think they should mean at any given time.
Patrick, your thoughts in this whole area of the charter and the so-called right to abortion, this edict?
Mm-hmm. Well, we know the Liberal Party has been pro-abortion for decades. It was Justin Trudeau's father who brought forward the bill to legalize abortion. But there's always been a good pro-life contingent within the party that has made a big difference in terms of the life issue. We saw that even in 2010, there was a motion that the Liberal Party put forward to declare that the government should be funding abortion overseas. And it was defeated by members of the Liberal Party working with the Conservatives. There were, I believe, 5 members of the Liberal Party who voted against their own party's motion at great cost, and they were able to defeat the motion because of that. Justin Trudeau's created a situation where that wouldn't be possible now. And it really is an attack on conscience. And what I worry about is, it's bad enough that he does it within his own party, but if he's willing to do it there, what is that going to mean for how he's going to rule the country? We're already seeing in Ontario and in Saskatchewan and other provinces these colleges of physicians attacking doctors' conscience rights. Electing Justin Trudeau is only going to make that worse. It's also worth bearing in mind that this edict in the Liberal Party is also in play in the NDP party, the New Democrats. It's something that they've had for many years. So it's not just the Liberals we should be worried about, it's the NDP who are actually the official opposition and are a party that should not be neglected as well.
Thank you.
Well, Your Grace, we're also appreciative of your track record for the pro-life cause. But looking at the whole picture, what can we do as a church to stem the tide of abortion? And what should our response be as Catholics?
I think the main thing for us to do is to stop being passive and become active. Our Holy Father, Pope Francis, is saying we've got to become missionary disciples. We don't leave it to the priests and to the bishops only to proclaim the gospel. We have to learn every day what the gospel means, including the gospel of life. We have not only the scriptures, we also have the teachings of Pope John Paul II and other holy fathers who've taught us about the importance of life. We need then to become disciples who are missionaries, who proclaim our faith. And we also have to get that something that our politicians and also the people in general are able to do with the public issues. I invited my people in Nova Scotia when we had the same-sex legislation being proposed. I invited them to speak to their members of parliament. And one member of parliament confidentially told me at the end of this campaign, when the same-sex marriage was enshrined in law, that she could count on one hand the number of people who spoke to her. One of my priests told me that people think that politicians have a list of people who are nags, who don't go along, who are troublemakers. And so we've turned the thing around. Instead of the lawmakers and the politicians that we elect representing our views, we have to kind of reflect them and not give them any trouble. And I think we have to turn things around. I try to encourage the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic Women's League, and other groups, active young people, to go and to take part in the March for Life when they have it, to stand up for a life chain, to go down and testify before the abortion clinic when we have 40 Days for Life. And I say, when you get involved, you discover it's not as hard as you thought. And you're going to be there with other people. But unless we have a conversion of heart and decide that as Catholic Christians, we have a place in the public sphere, we should not be shutting ourselves up because some politicians tell us that religion has no place in the public square. I think we would say the opposite. No, you have a right to be there. And you have a right to inform your politicians what you think, and you need also to take that into account in voting. Unfortunately, mainly financial issues, taxation issues are the ones that drive people. But we also need to find people who perhaps reflect your views on the social policy issues, but also on the ethical issues as well. We need to go and not only raise up good political persons who will present themselves as candidates for office, despite what Mr. Trudeau or Mr. Mulcair will say in the NDP or the Green Party. We need, and even, I have to say, our own Prime Minister, leader of the Conservative Party, basically tells people to be quiet about these issues. I think we need to make the life issues very important. So I think it's a long-term project. I don't think it's something, we're not going to become missionary disciples zealous for the faith overnight. And I think we're going to have to take a long time to learn the pro-life issues and to present the kinds of issues that Taylor told us about. She's aware as a young person that she's going to be fighting for this for 40, 50 years. And I think we have to take the long-term view.
We all have to keep our hands on the plow and hold on. Now, Deborah, tell us your thoughts. What should we do?
Well, I want to pick up on what His Grace said about being missionary disciples. I don't think that this is a battle that can be won without spiritual warfare and weapons and deep conversion, because if people don't believe in God, they're not going to believe that rights are conferred by Him. And so there has to be that kind of life-changing witness. And that means that we have to be ever more deeply converted and to have courage. One of the problems in the whole abortion debate, or on same-sex marriage or any of the other issues today, and I encountered this a lot in the press gallery, is that people think that it's a self-evident human rights issue. It's a matter of equality or fairness, or it's a matter of rights and choice and autonomy on abortion and euthanasia. And they look at somebody who has a contrary view as either stupid, evil, or both. And it's very, very difficult to find people who are willing to genuinely and openly listen. They will try to shoot your arguments down before you can even get them out of your mouth.
Alyssa, speak to us about the youth, about the movement happening within youth. Is there a movement happening within youth? Elections coming up, how does that relate to the youth? What do you see happening? Any signs of encouragement there? How would you speak to them?
Well, polls consistently show that young people are becoming increasingly pro-life. And because of that, we want leaders who will accurately represent us when it comes most especially to these issues on life and death. And so this year, with the Young People of Canada, we've launched a No to Trudeau campaign. And this is really to rebuild, start the big job of rebuilding the pro-life consensus and revitalizing the pro-life base. So I really appreciate the Archbishop's words that you can't just be passive, you have to be active, and the most active pro-life people across Canada are the young people. They want to get out there, they want to reach that mushy middle, that all the people who are gray in the issue of abortion, and talk to them about it, to let them know what abortion does to an unborn child, and to translate that into votes. So with this campaign, it's the largest campaign in the history of Canada because people all across the different provinces will be delivering over 1 million postcards to households. We'll be on the phones talking to people about abortion, getting them plugged in to the pro-life movement, and getting more people than ever before campaigning for their pro-life candidates. So this is a huge campaign that young people and people of all ages are doing to retaliate against this fundamental violation of not only human rights for the preborn, but also our conscience rights, our rights as Canadians who want to take part in the democratic process, who want to be part of different parties in Canada, but are currently being discriminated against by certain leaders.
Patrick, can pro-life people make a significant difference, enough of a difference to sway votes, elections? What are you seeing?
Absolutely, certainly, and especially on the local level. I know Campaign Life has seen numerous ridings where they've been able to go in and, for example, with a Conservative Party nomination, make sure that the pro-life candidate gets on the ballot rather than a pro-abortion candidate. And then once you have that person, then there's somebody for the pro-life people to vote for, or get behind and support. But if you lose the battle at the nomination and you get 3 pro-abortion candidates, then there's nobody to vote for. We've just this year seen in the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party a very positive result, in large part affected by the pro-life movement and the social conservative movement. The new leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservatives is a pro-life man, pro-family, and the reason why he was able to be elected was because of the support of groups like Campaign Life Coalition and others. And he was up against a person who was warning of this kind of the scary social conservative movement within the party who was going to take over if this fellow won. But he, in the end, won by a landslide.
It seems like the strategy, and this is true over ages, is to stereotype, marginalize, villainize, criminalize, persecute. So that's a sign of hope, that somebody's standing up against this, and we've heard about some elections where people get stigmatized in that way, and then we start to think, well, maybe we shouldn't even make this an issue, maybe somebody will get elected who thinks like us and we can get them in. What role does ongoing education play in the politics of abortion and culture and politics? How important is education? How do we do that in the church, outside of the church? Any of you?
Well, with the election in Ontario, of the provincial leader for the Conservative Party, it had to do with a real grassroots education effort to tell people what is in this sex education curriculum that is going to be imposed on all of the schools, including Catholic schools, in the fall. And there was promised consultation that never took place. And there has been an amazing reaction against that. I think 35,000 children were taken out of school last week as a protest, and thousands of parents have said, we're not going to put our kids in school next fall if the government goes ahead with this. So it depends, I guess, on what kinds of issues touch the hearts of people, and this one struck a chord. I'm not sure exactly what way in there is in abortion now, because I think for some people the whole idea that it's a human being that's being killed works, but we're seeing increasingly people on the feminist side who are saying, well, we know that it's a baby, but it's still our right. It's our body, it's our choice. And that becomes kind of scary.
Your Grace, we hear of the new evangelization, and oftentimes we're speaking about people who claim to be Christian and Catholic, and maybe indeed they are, but they seem to be more part of the problem than the solution. How does the new evangelization fit in to this in terms of going to people who claim faith, who may have faith, but what does the new evangelization mean for the politics of abortion and education?
Well, I think some of the politicians that we have are really cultural Catholics or cultural Christians. I'm not sure that they have a real relationship with Christ. Not sure that the life of the church is what, and the teaching of the church infuses and touches their understanding. I think we need to do a job on people who have become evangelized and have become sensitized to the gospel of Christ, the gospel of life, to then learn how to be politicians in a way that respects the dignity of each person, but also affirms life. And that's a big challenge. I know that a Jesuit friend of mine in Italy started a school for politicians, and he saw that as a need. I think we need it in Canada and probably in the United States as well.
Panelists, thank you so very, very much. We're going to be coming up with another panel on changing hearts and changing minds. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the final panel of EWTN's National Pro-Life Roundtable. We want to end on a positive note, on a committed note, to foster pro-life candidates, to promote them, to call Canadians throughout the country to join, to volunteer pro-life groups on campuses, colleges, everywhere, to give their time, their talents, their treasures to life.
Well, our panelists are Chantel Joes, and she's with Campaign Life Coalition. And then we have Jonathan Von Maren, and he's with the Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform. And then we have beautiful Rebecca Richmond, and she is the Executive Director of the National Campus Life Network. And then Brian Lilly, who's with the Rebel Media. Now, Brian, we're going to start with you. So as a journalist, you are not afraid to speak your mind on this issue or any other controversial issues. So what must we do to get the issue out, the message out? What can we do?
Well, speak your mind. Speak your mind when you have a chance. Now I have a microphone. I used to have a TV show. Now I'm doing online media, but I have a platform still, and so I use that. But a lot of us still have a platform, whether it's the dinner table to teach our children, grandchildren, social media with Facebook. One of the things that fascinated me, I used to work for an organization called Sun News Network, and we were a lot of very committed pro-lifers working there, and a lot of the people that you've got on the panel here would come on the show, on the network. And I kept hearing from pro-lifers, I'm so glad that you guys are there. We need these stories put out there, but then we would share them on social media, and they would go nowhere. They would go completely flat because people don't, I'm with you, but I don't want to let people know I'm with you. On other issues, people are willing to say, here's where I am, here's where I stand. If we're not willing to do that, then we're going to lose, because politicians, I can tell you, have been covering politicians full-time for the last 15 years. They're not leaders, they're followers. So we've got to lead them to where we want them to be, but that requires getting our friends, our family, our neighbors to change their minds.
Rebecca, you represent those who are on university, college campuses, standing firm for the gospel of life, and sometimes through their actions being arrested. You have some representing student groups on campus whose ability to speak is being pulled, the whole apostolate or ministry or representation. How do we continue to stand firm with such retaliation?
Well, first of all, we need to realize that we have to stand firm on universities because the message is so needed there. Universities are where the demographic most vulnerable to abortion is located. Women and men are making life and death decisions every day, and if we're not going to be there, they're going to make those decisions with only one side of the story. The other reason is that these are where our leaders are being formed. These are the people that are going to be holding the future of Canada in their hands, and we need to make sure that they know what is at stake with the abortion issue. And when students have a sense of that urgency, they're not willing to let any kind of obstacle get in their way. They're going to go out there and they're going to reach their peers. They're going to engage in productive dialogue because they know that their peers need that message so desperately. And what happens is hearts and minds are changed. Whenever we are willing to go out there and engage with people in a winsome, wise way, people's hearts and minds are changed. And then these students graduate. These students leave university and they go on to run pro-life organizations, to run massive pro-life campaigns. They become politicians, they go to law school, they become doctors and nurses, they become teachers, and they are going to secure a great future for our country.
Jonathan, your organization's national campaigns, New Abortion Caravan, Say No to Trudeau, and Face the Children, continue to show the true face of abortion in Canada, but not without controversy. Are these tools working to change hearts and minds?
The answer I can give to that one's a very resounding yes, because what we actually see in Canada, and I would argue in the US and other places as well, is a real cognitive dissonance when it comes to the abortion issue. People have these two competing ideas in their head at the same time and feel no need to reconcile those two ideas. So a lot of people say we need to show people who the preborn child in the womb is. And that's absolutely true. But I would argue that actually almost everyone instinctively knows that the baby in the womb is in fact a baby. It's why when somebody says they're expecting, nobody ever asks them what they're expecting. Because we all sort of instinctively know what actually is in the womb. Everyone has seen an ultrasound, everyone has seen a sonogram. So why is it that what we instinctively and intellectually know about the baby in the womb never translates over into impacting what we culturally believe about abortion? And it's because we have this cognitive dissonance and there's this wall up between the two. And what pictures of abortion victims do is they force people to reconcile those two ideas. And that's where the controversy comes from, because when people are forced to take two separate views that they've held for a long time, and they suddenly have to come to terms with the fact that those ideas don't work together, and they're going to have to make sure one of those ideas impacts the other, they recoil, kind of like when somebody's been in a dark room for a long time and you flick the light switch on. You sort of react, at first because the light actually hurts. But I have personally spoken to thousands of Canadians on campuses and high schools, on the streets, about this issue, and I have seen hundreds and hundreds of people change their mind, complete 180, go from pro-choice to pro-life. And it's because when you see the image of what abortion does to a baby, it changes everything.
And it's the reality. It's just
Exactly.
It's just the deception, the veil being lifted, and the truth being told. Well, Chantel, the National March for Life, it continues to draw over 20,000 young people, so to Parliament Hill every single year. Now, what are we turning the tide, and what else needs to be done?
Well, Joy and Jim, you've both been to the March for Life that we have, and you see the vibrancy. You see the young people ready to make a difference. They're not there for a day out to go look in the sun. They are ready to yell and scream until people realize the horrible act that abortion is. They're not fooled by terms like choice and terms like, you know, a woman's right. They genuinely understand that their fellow brothers and sisters are being aborted every single day, and we're not blinking, we're not doing anything, and they are outraged by all of this, and they know the scientific truth, and they've heard the apologetics of it all, and they're ready to do something. They're ready to become activists, and they're ready to become involved in politics, and we've heard, you know, from all of these different people in all sorts of areas that these young people are really going to take this on, and it's through the legacy of the work that our older pro-life heroes have done over the years that have laid the foundation for young people now to really make a social change. You know, we see it all the time. Young people, when they come to the truth, they are ready to make a difference. And campaigns from all of these fellow colleagues of mine, they really make a huge impact socially, and this is where young people want to get involved. I mean, you see it. They want to get involved not just in the classroom, but on social networks, on the media. They want to go beyond just the confines of their societal influences, and they want to make a big impact. They're seeing social injustices here across the world, and they really do want to make a difference. Is there a lot to do? Yes. Is it uphill? Yes. Is there no easy solution? No, there's a lot of prayer that needs to be done. It's an uphill battle that we've fought, and we're going to keep fighting, and no one is ready to stop. No one is ready to back down, and we're going to keep working at it. And you know, we're young, and we're ready to pass this on to future generations, and we're ready to get the help of our older generations, and we're not worried, and we're not afraid, and we keep doing it joyfully, because that's what the pro-life movement is. We're joyful and trusting in the Lord that He's got this. This is His battle, and we're just here to do exactly what it is that He needs us to do in every single moment, and that's what we're going to keep doing in any little way that we can.
This area, thank you. You know, it makes me wonder, hearing such activist words coming from all of you in various ways. Are we asking too much, or are we asking too little?
I think we're asking too little of people because, you know, we're in what used to be a Catholic church. We're on a Catholic network. How many of our fellow Catholics are pro-abortion? You know, the March for Life goes, and I applaud it, it's an annual call to Parliament. But Parliament isn't where the work on this needs to be done. The work needs to be done in our homes, in our schools, in our communities. And in Parliament, just for example, there's three major parties that could win the election this October. Two of them are led by Catholics, and they are the most staunchly pro-abortion politicians you will meet. I've stood in the room as they have said how they will not support anyone in their party being pro-life. But you'll find Catholics like that across the country. So we have to start in our own house. We have to start in our own house with the changing hearts and minds, because that's where the rot is. I would be willing to bet that the good majority of the people who identify as Catholics, not necessarily show up to Mass, but who say, I'm Catholic, they're going to vote for one of those two pro-abortion leaders in the election. And we need to change that.
Rebecca, in these situations where you find some people possibly being arrested, or you find this conflict with the administration of the university campus and so on, what does it do to people that face this? Does it make them wilt? Does it make them stronger? What does that realm of a degree of persecution, if we can call it that, play in building the faith?
It definitely is a culture of bullying that exists at university campuses, from the administration sometimes, certainly from the student unions, and the culture as well can make it very difficult to be pro-life for sure. But the interesting thing about that kind of circumstance is that it's like a fire. It forges incredible leaders in those difficult circumstances. People who realize that they have to make a decision. Am I going to be a pro-lifer of conscience, and I'm going to go to the march once a year, and I'm not going to really stick my neck out for this? Or am I going to have a really pro-life lifestyle? Am I going to make those daily decisions to be a witness, to be a leader, to make sacrifices on my campus? And one question that I'll pose to students and that really resonates with them is that if we are going to ask women and men in difficult situations to make the right choice, even if it's the hard choice, then as pro-lifers, shouldn't we be willing to make the right choice, even if it means our reputation, even if it means our friends look at us a certain way or our families might give us some flack? Are we going to ask those women to make those decisions? Let's make those decisions ourselves.
You know, it seems that our gospel or our philosophy is a philosophy of multiplication, and that theirs is subtraction. Whether it's euthanasia or abortion, it's the elimination of people. In this whole area of changing hearts and changing minds, and speaking to the people of goodwill, people who respect life, Christian, Catholic populations, are our minds and hearts beginning to be changed as regards multiplication, spiritually, evangelization, new evangelization, as well as the welcoming of children, openness to human life? Because I think multiplication is the solution in a big way, spiritually, numbers, votes, population. Just your thoughts on what you see among people, young people or even older people, in terms of an openness to life and the willingness to multiply.
Well, life is seen sort of as an accessory these days. I spent a lot of time talking to both high school students as well as university students, and one of the things that we struggle with is simply that a lot of parents, once they've got the condo, the timeshare in Mexico, and the second vehicle, it's time to have either one kid or maybe a boy and a girl. And those kids really know that. When we're talking to kids outside high schools especially, this generation is a lot more broken and a lot more hurting than any generation before us. And I talk to the full spectrum because we go on the streets all the time too. And a lot of times one of the reasons we find that our message has barriers is because when you tell a kid, you know what, well, you know, there's supposed to be a special bond between the mother and the child, and there's a responsibility that exists here, these ideas are often quite foreign to them because mom and dad might have gotten divorced and spend more time you know, with their consecutive girlfriends or boyfriends, or perhaps they were latchkey kids, they came home, mom wasn't waiting for them with a snack. They never really experienced that connection themselves, so when you tell them about this connection, it's completely theoretical for them. And that's why when we talk about a culture of life, we are very much talking about a sort of a seamless garment that we've been pulling the threads out of for quite some time. The example I always give when people say, how does other things relate to the pro-life movement? How is that openness to life that's gone threatening you? As I say, well, imagine trying to make a 17-year-old boy who's addicted to porn and comes from a divorced home that abortion is wrong. It's very, very difficult. And you've often got a lot of barriers and hurdles to get through on the way there.
Well, panelists, thank you so much. We are so encouraged. Changing minds and changing hearts. God bless you. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Now we want to turn our questioning over to our audience, some who have traveled great distances, all who are stakeholders in the great cause for life. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, my name's Jackie Jeffs. I'm Executive Director of Alliance for Life Ontario. My question is for Louise Harbour. This has been a wonderful panel and a marvelous afternoon. Louise, how does the educational movement, the pro-life movement in Ontario, change hearts and minds?
One of our preferred methods, of course, is to use the media whenever we can. And this winter we ran a campaign of television advertisements called Reaching Minds Through Media. We like to use the media because, for example, the television campaign allows us to reach millions of people in the province of Ontario with a life-affirming message about abortion. We do radio campaigns, newspaper advertisements, speaking engagements to community groups. And we also organize conferences, and one is coming up on men and abortion, reclaiming lost fatherhood. So, thank you.
Hi there. I'm Miriam Weston. I'm the editor of Catholic News World, cnworld.org. And my question is, it seems that we're reaching the youth, we're reaching everyone except the politicians. How can we change the hearts of Justin Trudeau, because he is part of our Catholic faith still? How can we change the hearts of all these politicians who are making the decisions? It's to everyone.
Who would like to?
I would say that it'd be very difficult to reach Justin Trudeau, except through prayer. That's basically the only way that you're going to. Unless there is a massive change in public perceptions and public engagement on this, politicians will always follow. On his personal level, for anyone here, it would be prayer. Unless you know him personally, the best you can do is just pray.
Can we have our next question, please?
Hi, my name is Clarissa Canaria, and I also work for National Campus Life Network. My question is for Jonathan. You mentioned briefly that in your conversations, things like porn act as barriers to the pro-life message. Would you be able to elaborate on that a bit more?
Well, the reason that things like pornography are a barrier to the pro-life message is because the pro-life message is essentially that human beings in the womb deserve rights. But the reason they're being denied their rights is because we've sort of objectified them, we've dehumanized them, and therefore we can do away with them. More or less the same procedure happens with pornography, because pornography objectifies women. And if you have a man who's used to every night objectifying women that he can see, it's going to be a lot harder to convince him that the child he can't see is human. So in both of these instances, in both pornography and abortion, you see that dehumanization leads to victimization. So they're different issues, but yeah, they function very much the same ways.
Our next question, please.
Hello, my name is Raymond Gremley. I'm the pro-life representative from local parish, St. Monica's Parish. My question is to the Archbishop. Your Grace, do you think that the hierarchy of the Church, like yourself, can do anything more to encourage your local pastors in promoting this cause for life? I sense that there's up till this time an eggshell approach, walking on eggshells, when it comes to addressing this very, very important topic.
Well, I'm not sure where the eggshells are and which parishes, but I would say that our own archdiocese has been making efforts to encourage our priests to be pro-life, to encourage their people to attend the vigils, the life chain, to engage themselves in 40 Days for Life and so on. And I think we've had a very good response from that. One of our challenges, of course, is that everyone who has a project feels that everyone should drop everything and do what they're doing. I think we have to give goodwill to our priests and support them, and encourage them, and maybe encourage them to try to find a bit more time for our own particular projects. But if you realize priests have tremendous pressures on them, just as the bishops do. I invite my brother bishops every year to come. Many of them have other obligations, but a good number of them really make great efforts to come for the March for Life. It's a long distance for many of them. It takes a lot of time out of their calendar. I think the goodwill is there, and some bishops can't come every year, but they come as often as they can. I think it's the same thing with our priests. I think we should take a positive view of them, maybe speak with them, encourage them. But personally, I find that our priests are very much pro-life and very much in favor of it, and will do all they can to support the life cause.
Can we have our next question?
Yes, thank you. My name is Pierre Beauchamp, and my question is to all. It's an expansion on the previous question, because it's my sense that parishioners in many parishes, because I go to Mass in different areas, and somehow I get the sense that people have put these issues of euthanasia and abortion particularly in file 13. And I agree that it is not the responsibility strictly of the priest to come up with solutions, but my question is there anything that we can do to sensitize people in church with what is happening with abortion? Because people have forgotten or don't want to talk about it. It's never talked about in most churches in a clear, simple, clear way. What could happen in parishes to further sensitize people to the issue of abortion particularly?
I think just expanding on what the Archbishop said, that I think the laity need to take the reins, if they will, and maybe start a pro-life committee, speak to their local priest. Can we have more pro-life activism in your parish? Perhaps we have pro-life education week, and the homily may reflect that week from the priest. Perhaps we participate as a parish one day in the 40 Days for Life campaign. That happens at least twice a year in Canada. There are many opportunities. Yes, the priests are very, very busy. So we need to ask ourselves, what is God, what is Christ asking us to do and take upon our shoulders to help educate our fellow congregants? And what can we do out in society to mirror the message and to spread the word?
Thank you.
Can we have our next question, please?
Thanks, Joy, and I just want to thank all of you for coming tonight. It's a great representation of our Canadian voice for life. And I have a question for either Jonathan or Alyssa. It's just encouraging to see the young pro-life movement, particularly CCBR, Campaign Life Coalition, come together and work together on these great cross-Canada initiatives. And I'm just wondering if this is something that will continue in the future. Do you see this, or is it just for these special, unique times?
Absolutely. I mean, we can do nothing. We have so much more power working together than working on our individual projects. And I think that's something key to the pro-life movement, is that when we work together, when all the leaders come together and work together on an issue, a particular campaign, it is 100 times more effective than if they did it by themselves. So I think that we'll definitely see more of this across the country with other pro-life organizations. And, you know, the pro-life movement is growing in unity more than it ever has, I think, so far. The youth leaders most especially you can see all of them up here working together and taking part in these cross-country initiatives. And I definitely think because of the success of these campaigns, that you'll definitely see more of this in the future.
That's all the time we have for questions. Let's thank our panelists and the excellent questions that came forth. That brings our EWTN National Roundtable to a close. We want to thank all of our panelists for sharing not only their information, but their lives with us. We want to thank the audience. That's been wonderful. And on behalf of Joy and the entire EWTN family, may we all build together a new culture of life. May God bless you and all of your loved ones. Till next time, God keep you.